Back in 2018, me and my mom had moved around a lot, and it ultimately culminated in us moving back in with my dad, who had just had a house in Kentucky bought for him by my aunt. And there was a lot of concern about me on the part of both my mom and my dad, and pretty much everyone. They were concerned about my mental health, about things that I was saying in my YouTube videos, about things that I was getting into and doing out in the world and online. And my dad had something that was always in the house. He had something that I had been hearing about pretty much my whole life, because of the fact that weed is pretty ubiquitous. Like, people know what it is, it's obvious. We had the weed conversation when I was really young. Now, of course, I hadn't smoked it until much later, but when I was like 6-7 years old, it was explained to me by him what marijuana is, its medicinal properties, the laws surrounding it, and the racism and corruption endemic to cannabis prohibition. And we had that conversation. So I had a pretty good understanding of what it was. I had seen my stepbrother, who was a lot older than me, smoke weed in our shared room when he had still lived with us. I had seen my mom smoke weed. I had seen my dad smoke weed. It was something that I had a pretty good understanding of. And there at the end of 2018, I was sitting down in my new room on my air mattress. I had my computer set up, but it was on a stepping stool. The monitor was on one part of the stepping stool, and the actual box was beside of it. I was just sitting there dicking around on my dad's mobile hotspot, which was incredibly fucking slow. You do not want to use the internet like that. I remember having to render my videos in 144p just to be able to upload them, and they ended up taking like 20 or 30 minutes to upload, even though they would be like 20 megabytes. It was absurd. It was insane having to use the internet on that thing before we got our ISP set up. But that's what I was doing at the time. And it was a day like any other. I was depressed. I was abusing my sleep medication, hydroxyzine at the time. I used to fucking, I knew that shit couldn't get you high. It would just make me sleepy. It would just reduce my anxiety. But it was a thing that I could take. So I would pop those things at literally every opportunity. If it were, about to be time when I was allowed to take my next dose, I would take twice that dose. And it might have fucked up my brain, to be honest. Like, I was doing this constantly. So it was a day like any other. I was on the computer, internet slow as hell. I was trying to log on to Mabinagi, which was an MMO that I was trying to understand how it worked. And I was also reading through 8chan, which was one of my favorite pastimes at this time, because I couldn't really watch YouTube videos. Like, there wasn't the bandwidth to stream anything. There certainly wasn't the bandwidth to upload my own videos, so I played Mabinagi, albeit very slowly. And I also listened to music. I was listening to a rapper called Wiki at the time, which is gonna come up again later. But my dad knocks on my door, and I'm like, what's going on here? I haven't been pestered that much recently. And he comes in with a little wooden box of nugs, and he has this metal pipe that I had recognized, I had seen before. I had also smelled that smell before. And he opens it up and he's like, I want you to try this. I don't think these meds are working for you. I've been really worried about you. And, this stuff is really good for mental health. It's good depression, bipolar, anxiety. He was listing these things out. And he was saying, like, I want you to have this. It was just a couple nugs, but he had me loaded into the pipe. And, he was telling me how to inhale as I tried to spark it up and smoke it. And I remember the smell and the taste. It was like profound. I didn't have any euphoria, but instantly I loved that aroma. It was like something out of a movie. I had been pretty accustomed again to the smell, but what I hadn't been accustomed to was actually having the taste and the smoke in my lungs. Now, contrary to what a lot of other people tend to experience or expect people to experience, I did not cough my lungs up. In fact, I didn't even cough a little bit. I remember my dad was badgering me like, oh, hey, are you gonna, cough yourself out or whatever? And it never happened. I remember a while after I had puffed out a couple clouds, he looked at me and he was like impressed. He had complimented me for not coughing, because normally he coughs quite a bit. I guess he thought that was like a manly thing of me or something. But I was sparking this up. I was taking these hits and nothing was happening. I felt like this weird pressure to behave as though something was happening. So I thought, like, oh, what are the stereotypical weed effects? Like, I'm just gonna act really happy. I don't know why I was doing this at the time, to be honest. I knew that I wasn't really feeling any different, and I didn't really notice anything, I didn't act over the top, but I tried to act like a little bit happier. And this was a thing, like a type of thing that I used to do a lot back then. Like I would just act like things were happening that weren't, or I would lie a lot and pretend. I was like a serial liar at the time. I don't ever pretend in this way anymore, but it was a thing that I started to do, but I couldn't commit to the bit. And then I told my dad, I don't think this is really affecting me. I don't think this is doing anything to me. And I thought I was kind of cool for having that reaction. Like in my head, I thought, oh, like, does this mean I'm just like so hardcore that like shit? Like, does this mean that I'm so hardcore that it doesn't even work? I mean, I see this shit everywhere, so I guess it's not that big of a deal, But then he told me, oh, when you do it your first time, nothing is gonna happen. It might not work. So I was like, okay, Dad, I guess it's not gonna work. But he left the nugs with, and I tried it again multiple times. Not that same night, but over the following days. And I remember when it actually started working. It happened to be around the time that we actually had internet. Like our internet had been set up, we were ready, it was good to go. And I was on a live stream with my friend DZ Dog. I don't talk about this guy very much anymore, but those of you who have been on my channel for 5+ years, you're gonna know who this guy is. I used to show up in his live streams all the time. He would show up in podcasts and videos on this channel. We also had a podcast called The D-Pad on his channel. He and I were streaming, and we were definitely not matching, I'll say that. I was sitting there fucking shoving these nugs into this metal pipe, sparking that thing up, hitting it, and my 16-year-old self giggling up a storm, just making these stupid jokes on the live stream. I was really feeling it at that point. I was kind of playing it up at first, but then as the stream went on, and I was inhaling that smoke and puffing it out, I was actually starting to feel it, and I was like, oh fuck, like this is lit, this is sick right now. I was bussin', dude. I literally felt like I was on cloud 9. It was enhancing my social capabilities, it was making things funnier, it was making me more charismatic, which is different than a lot of the experiences I ended up having with cannabis later. Like, I would smoke around my family or around people online, like in voice calls, and it didn't have that pro-social effect on me, like, not that long after. Like, pretty soon after, it would just make me very quiet. And that's actually how I was with marijuana for years. Like, up until very recently, it had that, like, silencing effect on me where I'd feel so much in my body and in my mind that I actually could not speak. And so this was one of the only times for the longest time that I had this like pro-social, just like really nice social experience with cannabis. And it also happened to be the first time that I properly got high, that I felt high. And this was after like 3 or 4 tries, and I was like, wow, this shit is great. I love this shit. And I didn't get any more for a little while after, but every now and then my dad would throw me a nug, or he'd throw me like 2 nugs. And it was this great thing every time it would happen. It would be like, fuck yeah, like free weed. Like I thought it was helping my mental health, and I think to some extent it was, because when I would do it, I wouldn't have flashbacks, PTSD, I wouldn't feel on edge, like I would just feel good, like I was bussin', dude. And that was my experience with cannabis thereafter, after those first couple times of not really enjoying it, not really having any experience. I was about to say a positive experience, but no, there was just no experience up to that point. I was on that stream, and I was joking around with him, and my ex was in the stream chat as well, and she was saying things to us and joking about the state that I was in. We were on Thug Pro, Tony Hawk's Underground, the modded version. That was a lot of fun. Of course, I think I was just watching him play it. Was I playing the game? I think I was playing the game for like a little bit, and then I ended up just watching him play through the stream when, and yeah, I ended up listening to Wiki and a couple other chill rappers, and that was a very comfy time throughout that night and throughout the subsequent nights whenever he would throw me some. It wasn't that often I would get some. On to 2019, I started getting access to cannabis a little bit more frequently. We had a little bit more money in the house, and so, he'd have most of it and he'd just throw me some. And my God, those are some really comfy memories. Just really peaceful times, meditating, listening to music, listening to Chapo. That's a really funny podcast. Watching like reruns of SpongeBob and shit, making YouTube video. 2019 was a great year for cannabis for me. But it all started there in late 2018, when I had just gotten into that new house in Kentucky, the one that I left last year to live in these apartments. It all started out with me laying on that inflatable mattress with almost nothing in my room, without even a desk, bored out of my mind, trying to make that flower work. And then, hey, eventually it did work. And that was a great thing, man. It's still in my mind. It's like, I think about those happenings and it just emanates with positivity. It's beautiful. It really was beautiful. And that was a pretty strong way to get into a new house. There was a lot of bad stuff happening at that house. I don't want to paint too of a picture. I ended up running away from home like literally the following month before the year was out. And then of course I got caught. I was several states away. I was all the way in NYC. But of course I was caught and I was sent back. And I was actually given more weed after being caught and being brought back, because my dad was like, oh, his mental health must be really fucking bad. I need to give him some more of this so he can stabilize. And I remember him saying that as well, like kind of begrudgingly, like he was pissed off about it and he just fucking threw it to me. Weird shit. That was some really weird shit. But the cannabis was what I kind of relied on for a while there to enjoy my life when times were hard there at that place, and it certainly did help. But that was my first time smoking weed.